any other further ado, I'm very pleased at introducing for you a local journalist, expert on centennial matters, Mr. Bob Beck from the Columbian, who will be talking about earning their pay. Bob?
Thank you very much. You know, I was amazed, I guess maybe I'm behind the times, to read in the paper about the problems Eastern Airline is having, to read that the pilots are making $80,000 to over $100,000 a year, and even the baggage handlers are making up to $45,000 a year. Well, that's a startling sum of money to me because I've never even approached that. So I began to wonder, since this is a state centennial, what would our founding fathers think of this type of a pay scale? So I did a little research, and I found a most charming story. In 1890, a young boy from Hawkinson, and I think he was about 15 years old. In those days, they began working in the woods at an early age. There were no child labor laws, so he got his first job working in the woods. He walked 6 miles to a spot where the trees were being felled, a lumber camp, spent the week there working 10 hours a day. At the end of that week, he was paid with a $5 gold piece, which comes out to about 10 cents per hour. I'd not seen a gold piece like this, but I'm told that it was about the size of a nickel, but a little bit thinner. So anyway, young John was so proud that he'd earned this money, his first job. He put the gold coin in his pocket and walked 6 miles along a forest trail back to his home in Hawkinson to show his mother. Unfortunately, and I suppose you can guess what happened, he had a hole in his pocket. When he arrived at Hawkinson, alas, his $5 was gone. But he didn't sit down and complain, although it could have been his whole week's work was wasted. He retraced his steps, and according to a story of the time, and I thought this was a wonderful touch, he retraced his steps and walked 2 miles back. Just at dusk, he found this little beauty lying on the moss, glowing in the last rays of the dying sun as only gold can glow. Think what that $5 meant to that boy. A contemporary of young John was another John, a man named John Nelson. He also lived at Hawkinson, and he owned a small farm there. In those days, the governor, and this might be something to take into consideration for our own budget problems, charged $5 fee a year for road tax because Clark County at that time had no roads, so you had to pay $5. But if you didn't have the $5, they had a provision that you could go out and labor on the roads, which he did. And in the museum is a certificate from the road commissioner giving John Nelson credit for $5 tax, road tax, for 3 full 10-hour days of work on the road. So that came out to 15 cents an hour, which is a little better than John the logger had done. At the beginning of the Depression here in Clark County, thousands of people were out of work. There was a great despair, and I know that a great many of you remember those days. I remember them as a boy. People were desperate. We got a new president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who came up with a courageous plan and got Congress to go along to form what they call the WPA, what today we probably would call a Make Work project, and that's what it was, but it brought salvation to thousands of millions of families throughout the country. So in Clark County, where there'd been long breadlines and people desperate for work, in 1935 the WPA hired several thousand men to work on the road. They could pay their rent and they could put beans on the table. Did these workers sit down and write Mr. Roosevelt a letter of thanks for this largesse? No. You know what they did? They went on strike immediately for higher wages. They laid down their shovels and picks and they demanded a 50% rise in their pay before they'd continue to work. Before we're too harsh on these people, we must know that the base pay was only 50 cents an hour, and the 50% pay hike only brought them up to 75 cents an hour, which even in those days, nobody got rich. But my favorite story, I think, I've been a resident of the Camas-Washougal area for about 40 years. Camas is a home of the world's largest, or one of the world's largest paper mills, and it was the first paper mill in Washington Territory, founded in 1883, the same year that the city of Camas was founded. When that mill started operation, boys as young as 13, 14, and 15 quit school and went to work, because in those times that's what happened. Somebody had to work to make ends meet. There was a man named Kyver Wallace, whom I interviewed when he retired. He went to work at the age of 15 in 1910, when the men and boys at the paper mill worked 11-hour day shifts, 13-hour night shifts, 7 days a week for $1 per day. They never got a day off, they never got a vacation, they never got a holiday, and if they wanted a day off, they went to the foreman and asked, and he said, "Sure, take them all off, you're fired." That was the temper of those times. Anyway, Kyver Wallace worked 50 years on the paper machines at the mill, and he worked his way up from the most menial task to become a machine tender, which is a very high-paying job. He retired in 1960 at the age of 65, and he wanted to give something back to the community that had been so good to him in all those years. So, upon his retirement, he decided to run for mayor. His only plank in his platform was an advertisement he ran in the local paper. Kyver Wallace for mayor. When he retired from the paper mill, 39 men got promoted. So they had their mayor's election, and thousands of people went to the polls. And when the ballots were counted, sure enough, and this is true, believe me, Kyver Wallace got 39 votes. And this just proves that it pays to advertise.